Hello everyone, and welcome to Talking with Tatum. We're taping inside the Wilson County Veterans Museum because our guest is Vietnam veteran Pat Tuggle. We'll talk about his time in that controversial war and the time he rode in a Huey helicopter like the one inside here at the museum, and how he ended up as a police officer in Nashville and what he does now that he's retired. Stay with us and let's get ready to talk. All right, Pat, thanks for joining us up here at the Veterans Museum in Wilson County up on East Main Street. And we're going to talk a little bit about your time in the service, but tell us a little bit about where you were born, where you grew up, some family stories, those types of things.
I was born in the old Baptist hospital, the red brick one down on Church Street, that's long gone. And family moved to Mount Juliet. Dad was raised in Wilson County, and we moved to Mount Juliet over Christmas vacation of my second grade year.
Okay.
I went to Mount Juliet Elementary, Mount Juliet Junior High, Mount Juliet High School, and I got out and joined the Army.
Well, Mount Juliet was a different place than what it is today.
Oh, totally.
And tell us about that. What have you seen changes down there?
Well, South Mount Juliet Road, from about where the interstate is to the county line, was gravel.
Okay.
North Mount Juliet Road was a two-lane pothole.
All in chip?
All in chip. Excuse me. And my graduating class, we had 98 seniors, and people were just amazed that that class was that big.
Had almost 100 kids.
Almost 100 graduates out of Mount Juliet High School, and they were just, people were amazed. But it was a good place to grow up. Worked on the surrounding farms, getting up hay and setting tobacco and doing stuff like that. And of course, Pop farmed and my uncles and grandfather farmed, so
right.
Worked on that. And then my first real public job was at the Baptist Sunday School Board as a mail boy.
Down in Nashville.
Down in Nashville. I'd leave school and drive to the Sunday School Board, and there was a route that I'd have to pick up all the late outgoing mail, and I'd run it through the franking machine and meet the postman.
Okay.
Get it on. So, but then again, like I said, after I got out, the 14th day of May, 1969 is when I joined the Army.
And what year did you graduate from Mount Juliet?
1969.
Okay, so right at graduation.
Well, I was on what's called the delayed enlistment program. I got signed up, and then a month after I graduated, I reported up to Fort Campbell.
Okay, so that was for basic training at Fort Campbell.
Basic training at Fort Campbell.
And that lasted how long?
8 weeks.
And after that, you went to advanced training.
Went to advanced training at Fort Knox. And learned to work on radios, on tanks. Don't like armored vehicles.
Why don't you like armored vehicles?
Because the only thing soft on an armored vehicle is the crew's bodies. Everything on that flipping thing will hurt you.
Even the lid.
The lids are particularly vicious.
They can take a finger off.
Oh, they'll take your head off.
Yeah. And after you did advanced training at Fort Knox, what did you do?
Well, I wound up down at Fort Benning in infantry OCS. And that was 24 weeks.
Now, had you ever had a desire to be an officer before? Or what prompted you to go from enlisted to officer?
Well, when I went in, I had no intention of being an officer at all. And back in those days, the ASFAB that the kids take in school now,
right.
You didn't take that till you got up to the reception center.
Right.
After you joined or got drafted. And if you scored high enough on it, they would come and talk to you. And I'd been about 4 or 5 weeks in basic training, and just like a whipped puppy, I was wore out. We come into the company area one evening after training, and they called my name, 6 or 8 other guys' names. We had to report to Lieutenant so-and-so, building such and such. Didn't have any earthly idea. We formed up and marched over there. And he was giving a recruiting talk for OCS. And I'm going, no, there ain't no way in the world. No, I'm not going to do that. And then finally something kind of clicked in my feeble mind, and I said, Lieutenant, where they give that test? They said, oh, building such and such. You know, you remember that big building where y'all took all your tests when you first reported in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How long is a test, Lieutenant? He said about 4 hours. And then it clicked in my feeble little mind. I could go take that test and sit down for 4 hours in the air conditioning. This was July in Fort Campbell, no air conditioning. Sit for 4 hours in the air conditioning and wouldn't have a drill sergeant screaming in my ear. So I took the test.
You must have scored.
And I scored good enough. They said, I'm down Fort Benning, I'm OCS.
Okay. And that was a better part of half a year. And so after you completed Officer Candidate School, Fort Benning, which
Right.
is the infantry school,
Yes, sir.
what'd you do?
Came to Fort Campbell as a training officer in a basic training company.
Okay.
I was a world traveler. Fort Campbell, Fort Knox, Fort Benning, Fort Campbell.
But you wound up going to Vietnam at some point.
Spent a year there, and then they shipped me to Vietnam.
Do you remember when you arrived over there?
I got there in June of 1971 and left in June of 71. I mean 72. I'm sorry.
So you're over there for 12 months.
Yes, sir.
And what were you doing over there when they put you down? The primary or big American involvement had drawn down by that point.
Well,
And the war was winding down, but we still had a combat presence.
we had a combat presence. I was in the 196 Light Infantry Brigade, and we were a component of the Americal Division, 23rd Infantry. And then they stood the Americal down and stood us up as an independent brigade. And we were it was the first American Army combat unit to arrive in Vietnam, and it was the last one to leave.
Is that right?
196, yeah.
So it was there for the whole time?
There for the whole time. And I was an infantry platoon leader, and I was a mortar platoon leader, and I was a reconnaissance platoon leader.
During that 12-month
During that time, and then there toward the end, as they were standing us down, I was an assistant supply officer to help turn all that stuff in.
Now, where Vietnam or South Vietnam, of course, doesn't exist anymore. No. The southern half of the country was divided up into zones. And the Marines had the responsibility up north in the Central Highlands. Where were y'all?
Well, Marine. By the time I got there, the Marines had been taken out, pulled out. It was all Army. I was in what they called I Corps, which was the northernmost division, operational area.
DMZ.
And we were outside of Da Nang.
Okay.
Our job was to try to keep the rockets from falling on Rocket City.
And what would you do to try to interdict those rockets? What was your mission on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I don't know if this needs to go on tape or not, but it's find them and kill them.
Go search and destroy, they call it. And
Go look for them.
so you would take out a platoon, and y'all would go to a particular area.
We'd be given an area on the map. I said that's your area, and you go and you clear that area.
Right.
And we would be out sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes a month. Once we're out for 6 weeks.
6 whole weeks without a shower, without air conditioning, without a chance to relax.
You get rather aromatic.
Yeah. And during that time, you had, like I said earlier, the war was drawing down. Did you have any problems with the troops that were coming in at that point?
American soldiers are amazing creatures. They will stand up to the task and perform the mission.
So you never had any problems of rebellion or dissension or anything of that?
Oh, you'd have people that act stupid, and we were in the rear one time on stand down. Company commander got me and the other platoon leaders and said, "They're smoking dope in the such and such barracks. We're gonna go raid it." Okay, boss, we need to cover the back door. He said, "No, I don't want to do the paperwork. We're gonna run screaming through the front door and let them fools hit the darkness out the back door and get away." Okay. Well, that day they had put fresh razor wire about 15, maybe 20 yards behind the perimeter behind that barracks. And we hit the front door screaming, and then we heard screaming out back and went. And about 4 of them had run full tilt into that razor wire. And razor wire is some god-awful stuff. I don't even like to be around it. and they're just hanging there in the razor wire. I said, well, Captain, what do you want us to do? They said, get some of the buddies, get them down, take them over to the aid station. I said, you gonna charge them? They said, there's not an Article 15 in this Army that can do more than what that razor wire did.
So you were kind of creative at the time.
Yeah, times were different back then.
Right, right. It didn't have to do all the paperwork that way.
That's right, no paperwork.
And now you had an experience on up here at the Veterans Museum. We've got a UH-1 helicopter, a Huey, which was used for troop transports or resupply for medevac in Vietnam.
Yes, sir.
You had an interesting encounter or interesting story about one of your missions involving the Huey.
We were going way back, and there's a follow-on story to this too. We were going way back up toward, we might have been in Laos, I don't know. But we were going in so far back that the only artillery support we could get was the 175 long toms, which at that time was the artillery piece in the Army that had the most range. And it was in the monsoon season, and you had to go back through about 3 mountain passes to get back in there. And they got an element in, got the command element and the platoon in there, right in the middle of Indian country, trying to get them reinforced. Well, every time we try to go in, clouds cover up the landing zone. And one time I saw when they popped the smoke grenade to mark the landing zone, it's just like God pulled a blanket over it. The clouds just boom, covered it up. So late in the evening they decided that it cleared up and everyone tried to get as many people in there as they could. So we piled a bunch of folks on those helicopters, as many as they'd carry. And an officer was always first one on the ground and last one out. So he was always the last one on the helicopter. You were the first one off, as an officer. So I'm sitting there, I've got a very narrow in both ways, wide and deep, spot where I'm sitting, and it's pretty precarious. So we go flying back up there, and again, same thing happened. We're inside of the landing zone, clouds just covered it. Boarded the mission, headed back down. We came through a pass, and we were flying 80 knots in one direction, and I could see my pants legs blowing toward the back of the plane. And a gust of wind caught us and spun us and almost put our tail boom in another helicopter. And I looked down and I saw my pants blowing forward. That's how strong that gust of wind was. And I slipped out of the helicopter, falling. And a guy named Billy Roddy, our RTO, radio telephone operator, he grabbed my rucksack frame and held me while I was flapping in the breeze until I could get my feet on the skid.
You weren't hanging on the skid or wasn't straddled the skid. You were.
I was hanging by my rucksack straps.
And going at least 80 miles an hour in a storm, in a mountain pass, and a good distance off the ground.
About 1,500 feet.
Okay. That would have been the end of Pat Tuggle.
I don't like heights. I just don't like heights.
And Billy Roddy, you said was his name.
Yes, sir.
Have you kept up in touch with him over the years?
Last I heard, he was living in Texas. And but the follow-up story to this, the next day the clouds cleared out and they put us back there. And we're so far back there we can barely see daylight.
Right.
And we had to find an existing bomb crater where they'd bombed somewhere where there was a break in the jungle canopy to get resupplied. And the helicopter hovered and dropped our rations and our ammunition and our mail. And we had to go down and get it in entrenching tubes and dig them out of the mud at the bottom of the crater. Mm-hmm. And I had a letter from my mother. And you know, it was snail mail back in those days. She was at least a week old.
Right.
And she had enclosed an article she'd clipped out of the newspaper where President Nixon had announced a halt to all ground operations in Vietnam. And she was ecstatic because she thought the war was over and her boy was coming home. It was damn near a month before we got out of that flipping jungle.
Well, obviously she had some inside information that your unit didn't have.
Yeah.
Did that end your ground operations?
No.
Did you have some more after that?
We had more after that. We just, have to go One thing I was proudest of, and I doubt you'll find it in any history or anything else, was the North Vietnamese went into a outlying town, village, there close to where we were, and just scooped up about 400 or 500 people for slave labor. And we're herding them back toward the mountains, and they dropped us in to block them. And when the NBA saw us coming in, they just disappeared.
Let the folks go.
Let the folks go.
Yeah.
So, we saved 400 or 500 people from.
Well, you also had a personal relationship with Vietnamese
Yes,
people over there. You had, that's where you found your bride.
I met my wife. Sure did.
And what were the circumstances about that?
I used to tell the story that when she would be there, she's passed on now, but she'd be there, and people asked, and I said, well, one morning just before daylight we got hit, and I caught her coming through the wire with a satchel charge. And I grabbed hold, and things felt kind of different, so I held on till daylight, and I realized I had a wonderful war trophy. She'd get up on her tippy toes.
Yeah, I bet she would.
But actually what happened, I can tell you, I don't know if she got enough tape or not, but I got sick, got pulled out of the field, and a couple of different ailments, but the main one was phlebitis. And they had me on blood thinners. Well, you can't be in the field with blood thinners.
Right.
So they had me up on the forward fire base, and she worked there at the club, and her and 2 or 3 of her buddies that worked there, they brought them up one day, flew them on a helicopter, and up there to serve beer and sodas to the guys and this, that, and the other. That hadn't been back to the rear in a long time. And she came in on a Huey. She's sitting in the right rear seat. I don't know what day it was, but I remember the incident.
First time
I ever saw her. She's on a helicopter.
And stayed together. Relationship was on from that point.
Our actual marriage lasted 41 years, 9 months, and 17 days.
That's awesome. What a blessing that is. And y'all have children and grandchildren out of that.
Have children and grandchildren.
Tell us a little bit about your family before we get into what you did when you got back from.
I got my oldest daughter was she already had Linda and brought her over. I adopted Linda, and then we had Joan there. She got there just before Christmas in 1972, and Joan came along on 30th of September of 1973, so didn't waste any time. And then later on, I had my son, James Patrick Jr., and today Linda has one grandson, has one son, and 3 stepsons. Joan has 2 sons, and JP has got a son and a daughter.
Okay, so you got a house full.
Oh, I got a bunch.
Now.
Got a bunch.
And but when you came back to the country, you said right around the end of 1972. Did you come back to Nashville, or did you go somewhere else?
They brought me back and stationed me down at Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama.
Right.
Best kept secret in the Army. Wonderful base.
Wonderful
post. And we stayed down there.
Now, did your wife come back with you at that time?
No, it took about 6 months.
Okay.
And lots of money.
And paperwork.
And paperwork, and paperwork, and paperwork. And it took a while, but it was worth it because she stayed. She'd been here about 5 years and got to study and got her citizenship.
Right.
And
were y'all ever able to go back to Vietnam?
She went back several times.
Still had family over there?
Still had family over there. First time she went back, we didn't have any type of relations with Vietnam, so she had to fly to Thailand. And she got a visa to Vietnam that was a separate sheet of paper that they inserted in her passport. Well, she flew to Vietnam, visited her family and all, came back to Thailand, they stamped her entry, pulled the sheet of paper and trashed it so U.S. authorities wouldn't know she'd been to Vietnam.
Okay. But you got to reconnect over there.
Got to reconnect.
Did you ever make it? You didn't make it back over there. Ever had any desire to go back?
No, sir.
Okay. So when you got back, you went to Redstone Arsenal down in Huntsville, waiting on your bride to get back to the States, and you mustered out of the Army when?
I got out of the Army in November of '73,
Okay.
and came home, did a few odd jobs here and there, and wound up applying for and some way or another getting appointed to the Metro Police Department
In Nashville.
in Nashville. Did 11 years there.
And you probably got some good stories about that time, some we might not be able to tell. It's a different world.
I got more I can't tell than more than I can tell.
But you stayed with them 11 years, and did you stay in the reserves? Or?
Well, I stayed in the Army Reserve, and then fortuitous circumstance, I wound up drilling with the Air National Guard. I was an instructor in the Army Reserves, and a bunch of the guys I worked with were in the Air Guard Security Police Unit. And they got a mission change where they're basically what they called Air Base Ground Defense. It was basically small unit infantry tactics, and wanted to know if could come out there and teach them.
Okay.
And I did, and worked with them for a couple of years as an Army guy, and then wound up transferring over to the Air Guard.
And you wound up retiring from
And wound up retiring.
And
was out there as a part-timer on weekends for a while, and then got hired full-time as a technician.
okay. And since then, you've gone to work for Wilson County as a judicial commissioner,
Yes, sir.
magistrate, we call it.
Yes, sir.
And tell us what that job is about for folks who don't know.
Well, it's the first entry to the judicial system for people, majority of people. And what we do is we basically conduct probable cause hearings to determine if a warrant should be issued
For a person's arrest.
for a person's arrest. And we service all state and local agencies that operate inside Wilson County. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if it's the City of Lebanon, the county sheriff, or the TWRA.
Okay.
We service all of them, and we do the warrants, and then for the people that get arrested, we go back and have bond arraignments and try to set reasonable bonds
Based upon what state law requires.
based on what state law requires. And people need to understand the bonding system is not punishment. It's just a very, very inefficient, but the best way we've found so far to try to make sure people show up in court.
Because a lot of folks still won't. Even if they made bond, they won't.
They won't, they skip bond. And we also do orders of protection.
Okay. And but the law says a magistrate or commissioner should be neutral and detached.
Yes,
So,
sir.
you got a police officer comes in, or maybe even a citizen, says this has happened to me, and you don't have an interest in that, monetary interest or emotional interest. You have to be convinced that there's reason to believe that a crime might have been.
Reason to believe that a crime. That's what probable cause is. The facts and circumstances would make a reasonable person believe a crime's been committed.
And so when the warrant's written up and signed off by the complaining party, you issue the warrant for
Issue
that
the
person's
warrant.
arrest.
And we just like judges like yourself. I mean, if there's a connection of some kind, we recuse ourselves and get another commissioner up there.
Right.
Example of that, my son used to work as a Lebanon officer while I worked up there as a magistrate, and now he works as a county
So any case
officer.
that he brings up, you're
If he
not.
brings in, I don't touch it.
So you won't see two different Tuggles names on
You won't see that. And basically what I do, he'll call and say, especially at night, he said, I need you to call somebody to come in. I said, no, you come up here, get your paperwork ready, and then I will call somebody in so they don't have to spend 2 hours waiting on you.
Yeah.
And
But I know you brought a few things here today, and we've got a couple out here on the table, and I know we'll get a close-up shot with them in a few moments. But one thing that you have is a carabiner and a kind of a unique case knife, and that actually went to Vietnam with you.
Yes, sir.
Tell me about that.
well, my brother gave it to me before I left. Said, you might need a good knife over there. I said, well, yeah, it's a good utility knife. And the unique thing about that particular knife is Case only made that model with a lock blade 1 year, and I happened to get one of the lock blades. People just deny they exist, but I've got one. And what the carabiner is for on the sheath is you'd hook it on your belt loop. That way when you put your web belt on, the web belt covered the carabiner and left your left your knife free where you could access your knife.
It's not trapped under your web
Not
gear.
trapped on the web gear.
Okay.
And I carried 3 knives over there. I carried a machete, what they call a bush knife, and that particular knife. And the 2 knives that got the most use was the machete and that knife.
So was that kind of a memento, or was that something you felt kept you safe, or was it a connection to home?
Well, there's a connection to home, and there's also a really good, I mean, you're living in the jungle. You always need a knife to cut something.
Okay.
Cut string, cut sticks. We used to make what they call mechanical ambushes, booby traps, IEDs. We'd take a claymore mine and we'd run a wire, and you take a plastic spoon from your C rations and cut a piece about that long, about 2 inches long. Drill a hole, take your knife, drill a hole in one end, and on the other end, you'd shave it down till it's very thin. And then you'd hook your claymore mine up to you'd split the wire and hook it up to a clothespin. Mm-hmm. Like that, so you had wire on top and bottom. You'd stick the piece of plastic spoon in there,
Right.
have it tied off. Somebody came along, kicked the wire.
That made your connection.
It would make the connection and detonate your mine.
Yeah. And claymore was a pretty vicious little weapon.
It was a directional mine, and it can change your way of thinking.
An anti-personnel weapon, a shaped charge, and it would basically send 20,000
buckshot, just blow it out in a wide thing. I will tell you this, that you read all the hunting adventure stories from back in the 20s and 30s about hunting tiger.
Right.
And these wonderful rifles they use to hunt tiger. Mm-hmm. You take a 480-pound tiger and bust him with a claymore mine, he can't lay down and die quick enough.
Really? Mm-hmm. So I guess wildlife would trip those things.
Anything is hit it.
Yeah.
A good windstorm would trip them.
Okay. And then the other thing you got here is a hat with some military decorations on it. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's just a ball cap. It's got the 196 Light Infantry Brigade, Vietnam, and then got a small. It's got the 196th insignia, which is it's supposed to represent a match from a matchlock musket. Mm-hmm. And then next to it, I got a pin on there, the old AmeriCal Division patch. It's got the 4 stars of the Southern Cross on that, and then on the other side, I've got my miniature combat infantry badge.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add as we wind up here in the last 2 or 3 minutes?
Well, that was an experience I wouldn't give anything for, and I don't have any desire to ever repeat it.
But it did make your life richer.
It enriched my life. It did.
A good woman too.
It did. I did. She was a fine lady, a wonderful wife, and you can check with my grandchildren, and they'll tell you she was a wonderful Banoi. That's Banoi.
Banoi.
That's Vietnamese for grandmother.
Okay.
And yep, good lady.
Well, that's a super story on that. Do you live in Wilson County?
I live in Mount Juliet. Yes, sir.
So you've gone full circle. You born at Baptist Hospital, mm-hmm. lived in Nashville for a while, made it to Mount Juliet, grew up in Mount Juliet, mm-hmm. been to the other side of the world as well as Louisville, Kentucky, and Fort Benning, Georgia, mm-hmm. and now you found your way back to Mount Juliet. Well, that's an awful good life, and thanks for sharing your story with us, Pat.